everyone, and welcome to a Mulberry Talent Partners Career Conversation. My name is Leah Pons, and I am a Talent Acquisition Specialist here at Mulberry. A little bit about Mulberry. We are a full-service staffing and recruiting agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with an office in the Silicon Valley. We specialize in the professional placements of human resources, professional and financial office, payroll, and operations positions with direct hire, temp to hire, and temporary opportunities. So let's dive in today. Today we are joined by our founder, Lauren Francis, and Erika Khanna. With 12 years of experience in film and tech, Erika is driven to build impactful communication programs with creativity and integrity. And today, Erika will share insights on spotting green flags for a great culture fit in your next interview. Before we get started, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A window, and we will plan on answering them throughout the conversation. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Erika Khanna and Lauren Francis.
Oh, good afternoon and welcome to Mulberry, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we are so happy that you're here. We are enthusiastic about today's conversation and speaker. Before we begin, we are pleased that today's discussion has drawn so much interest. We have a record number of guests with us today, which is really, really exciting. We just want you to know that we do welcome your topic and speaker recommendations because these conversations are for you, our audience. And our goal is to bring topics and speakers that are of interest to you. So please feel free to reach out to me directly via LinkedIn or my email with all of your brilliant ideas. We would love to hear from you. Turning to Erika, our global girl. She's coming to us from Montreal today. She's lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, the UK, as well as born and raised in Montreal. So we were introduced to Erika through Tila, who is one of our Mulberry talent acquisition partners. And she, prior to joining Mulberry, Tila worked with Erika and recommended that we talk to Erika, that we have a conversation about a conversation. Erika's passion and commitment to culture and to people led us to today's topic, spotting green flags, interviewing for culture fit. So welcome, a huge welcome to you, Erika. Please introduce yourself to our wonderful guests and share your story.
Sure. Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. And I'm so excited that Tila had mentioned my name for this conversation. It's a conversation that I myself have been super passionate about, especially over the last couple of years. So initially, as you both mentioned, I got started in the film world and made the pivot into tech about 7 years ago from a content marketing perspective. But I was always really excited about how companies worked and the way that they were making sure that they were well-oiled from an operational perspective. And in that sort of place, I started to find my place in a more culture-specific role, which is how I am now the head of people and culture over at Thirdweb, a Series A startup that focuses on Web3 applications. It's very exciting. And the culture conversation, I think personally, is at a very interesting time, especially with all of the different tech layoffs happening and so many people changing jobs. The culture landscape is a really exciting topic to talk about. So I'm excited to be here today.
One of the things that you and I talked about was how the interest has been there and it grew along with your pivot and changes and just all that you were involved in professionally. And do you want to share a little bit about what happened in one company and looking back now, how it's helped shape you and how you approach not only the work that you do in your organization now, but how it has shaped you and helped you actually get to this role?
Yeah. So initially, when I first started working in the tech world, I wasn't really quite clear on the different questions to ask when it came time to learning about culture. A lot of the time, I would ask a lot about the role, and then I would find myself in different roles that I really liked, but I would be in a position where I didn't really jive with the company culture, be that from either like a work balance perspective or a personal values point of view. And I started to think about how I could ask more questions related to what what I was looking for out of not only the role, but also the environment that I wanted to work in and the collaborators and the dynamic that I wanted to have with either my managers or my peers. And through sort of that self-reflection, I started to integrate those questions into the interview process. And I started to find that I was being able to match myself with more closely aligned positions than what I would have otherwise been in. And I think I'm part of the same pool of people who have been in different roles before, where they get there and they realize this isn't necessarily what they expected. And they're not actually sure what that means, because the role and the work itself is still very interesting to them. But maybe what the company stands for or the way that they go about doing the work is very different to what they initially intended when they were interviewing for the role. More recently, I had an experience where I found myself in a very similar situation where I was really taken by a company. I really wanted to work for them, and I thought that it would be a really exciting moment. And then I found myself having to do that U-turn mentally. And now in my role, I found myself asking questions to my team before I got hired that was more closely aligned to what their plans were for initiating a value system, how my role would factor into that, what type of collaboration or leadership I would be able to have from a thought leadership perspective, and how many contributions I'd be able to have to the culture, especially given where my role focuses. So it's been an interesting journey of self-discovery and self-reflection, along with also trying to match that to my professional career. And I think for so many people, we find ourselves in these spots where we thought something was going to be one thing and it's another, and we could blame ourselves and wonder, like, where did I go wrong? How could I have known that this was going to be the case? And there are different questions that we can start to ask, especially as the culture conversation becomes more mainstream now. So I'm excited to talk about those with you today.
Absolutely. I wonder, a couple things come to mind. One is, when is it in the interview process, when does it feel like to be the right time to begin that conversation?
Yeah. So in the interview process, obviously, we don't want to lead with questions related to culture, especially if it's like an initial phone screen or if it's the first conversation that you're having with the interviewer. I think first we want to lead with, what is the company like? What are their values? And have those sort of tee up the culture conversation, and then have that be woven into a more elaborate conversation about what the role itself is about and what your job is essentially going to be. And then through learning more about the role, you'll also start to learn more about those that you'll collaborate with. And once you start to get a feel for what your team is going to look like, then the sort of questions around the dynamics and the way that things are managed is a really great sort of segue into the culture conversation. So you want to warm it up first by feeling out what the role is, getting some of your initial questions related to maybe some of the more technical aspects about the position ironed out first, and then start to weave in those questions about culture after.
Yeah, so it's important to manage the timing.
Yes.
And also to, one of the things that I've learned from doing this for so long is people leading with how the role is a match and how their skills and experience align with the job description and so on. It's really all of those pieces first. Yeah. And then culture. What kind of homework do you think that job seekers can prepare best for this conversation, for the culture piece when it comes in, let's say this round 2 or 3?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think there's like a degree of self-reflection that should go into every interview that you have when you're a job seeker. So if you have an interview scheduled, part of your homework is not only to learn about the role and find different examples of when you were able to articulate different experiences that match what the role is going to be and what the expectations are of the people hiring for that role. But the other end of that is also looking into the company's career website. How are they talking about their values? How are they sharing those publicly? If they're not, trying to find, again, that moment in the conversation to be able to ask those questions. And then also digging within yourself to find what are the things that you are really looking to find from your collaborators. Do you want to see a very clear line between how you are inspired about your day-to-day with your manager, or do you want to look towards other people for that? Do you have different career development goals that you want to hit, and will this company be one that's going to allow you to explore those? These are all questions that you can ask yourself, and once you get to that culture conversation, you can start to figure out what the path towards career development would be like, and also different options and opportunities that would exist on the team to contribute to building the culture.
So do you think that the interview process has 4 pieces? It has the skills and experience in that conversation, the growth path related to that individual or that company and how that would fit, the culture piece, and then of course, what am I missing? There's one other,
I guess a management also. I
Yeah.
think management plays into culture in a very big way. And so I would agree that there are those 4 pillars. I think, looking out firstly for the sort of key pieces of the role and how you're going to fill them and what your experience is like. And then looking more towards how you're going to be able to add value to the team is a huge component. So obviously leading in with how you're going to be able to fulfill the need that the existing team has. And then from there, sort of discovering a little bit more about the dynamic of the team, the dynamic of your manager, the way that the company positions itself in its values and whether or not those are embodied in specific ways and behaviors and team principles. And then also looking at the relationship that you can have with your manager and what you're looking to accomplish within that too. Are you looking to be somebody's equal and not really being micromanaged? Do you need that level of strong supervision or involvement from a manager so that you feel like you can kind of bond with them more closely? Through some of that more kind of reflective work and really understanding what type of dynamics will really allow you to feel like you're excited and feeling fulfilled about your day-to-day is going to be really key for those conversations.
One of the things that we want to make sure we don't do is take our past bad experiences into the conversation, because I think sometimes it's hard to do, but the way to position that. So could you help our guests learn a little bit more about, we want to make sure that we're positioning it such a way that we're not having some negative conversation around our previous situation. So we want to turn it into questions so that we don't repeat those same challenges that we had previously.
Yes. Absolutely. I think the first thing to think about when you're interviewing, if there's something really specific that you're trying to avoid, is to remind yourself that the person that you're talking to likely has absolutely no context to what you have experienced previously.
Right.
And going in the conversation with an open mind to what they can potentially offer you as a role and as an environment to work in and all of those things, and seeing this as a potential possibility with like a positive outcome. So teeing it up in that way will help to reshape how you are able to articulate your story without harping too much on like details that people would find really off-putting or that they themselves don't want to have brought into the dynamic of the team. So something really specific that you can do is ask the question, when was a time at this company where something so uniquely appropriate to this company happened and how did you deal with that? So for example, if you're interviewing for a startup, for example, we had to pivot really quickly because we found that we had to move our product market fit. And so as a result, a lot of our team had to be really flexible. And that's something that is unique to our team, but also something that we pride ourselves on is our ability to adapt. And so what you can think about in that way is, okay, if they're adapting really quickly, then potentially, I'm just hypothesizing for different examples here, but say, for example, in the past, you ran into that same issue and the result was a lot of layoffs. You can see how within this new company, they're looking for ways for their team to add value and contribute to the market that they're in. So that kind of helps to sort of fulfill that gap of what that question would be and answer that question that you might have in your mind. And another question that you can also ask is, depending on how deep you are in the conversation and how further along you are in the interview process, you can ask the question point blank, like, when was there any sort of restructuring on this team and how did the management team handle that? And that's something that more and more people are starting to ask, especially now with the amount of layoffs that have happened in the tech world and in other sectors as well. So being able to ask those hard questions, I think, is half the battle. So once you feel that level of confidence that you're adding something to this conversation by asking some of these questions, you're not only showing that you're trying to, weed out which option is going to be the best one for you as far as next step would be in your career, you're also showing that you're willing to have some of these tougher conversations in a very constructive way.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference in and it shows how engaged you are and how aware that you are.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things that I found with coaching people is that it's scary for them to talk about this topic. We'll go back to the pandemic. Okay. It changed a lot of things. And one was where job seekers became more empowered to ask for what they want. If the organization isn't going to meet these needs, and I'm moving on to the next opportunity. Now, due to the layoffs, here we are again. We're in a different time, and we're in that same space again where we want the employment, right? At the same time, we still don't want to be in an unhealthy workplace or a team dynamic that is not, positive. So it's a little bit tricky. It's trickier now because we had a lot of agency.
Yeah.
And we still do. So we have to figure out, how do we balance those two differences?
Yeah. And to your point of like, why do people feel like this is a daunting topic to talk about? I think we initially saw culture potentially pre-pandemic. It was a little bit less popular to talk about. More kind of tech companies or startup companies were talking about culture, probably more so than companies that had been around for a really long period of time, or more kind of corporate organizations. And a lot of people felt like culture boiled down to social activities. So it was like a lot of human resources people were defaulting to, oh, we need to inspire the culture, so maybe we'll host 1 or 2 mixers a month and satiate that need of the team. But as things developed and as people had more time to process, what am I actually doing at this company, and is it actually fulfilling me, which is the sort of existential crisis we all found ourselves in at the start of the pandemic, I think it really initiated a stronger culture conversation around knowing that culture is not just having ping pong tables and happy hours. It was a lot more about operationally, how do things work, and who can I go to for help? What kind of benefits do I have access to? What does our PTO strategy look like? And are people encouraged to take that time off? How are people supported in their external activities? And is that something that companies want people to explore more of? Are there volunteer opportunities with the company or career development opportunities? What does your employee track look like when you get hired somewhere? Are you going to be pigeonholed into one space and only be able to do that job for however long you plan on staying at that company? Or is there a management track or leadership opportunities or other opportunities to have a lateral move? These are all questions I think we started to ask ourselves. And this is really what the culture conversation is about. And it's a lot less about creating these sort of social activities, which are equally important and are great to have, but they are the bells and whistles. And I think we saw a lot of people starting out with bells and whistles versus looking at the deeper, more underlying themes.
Sure. Looks like we've got Leah.
Yes, we got a question. The last 2 positions I've had have turned out to be / have job duties not mentioned in the interview process or downplayed as to the importance to the job. How do I bring up that situation in my job search and interview process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can be tough out there with getting hired and seeing your job spec. And then once you actually step into the role, things can change really quickly. And so I think that can be discouraging for many people who potentially saw one part of the job that they really wanted to fulfill, and then they're in a different direction. Going into a new job opportunity, what I personally would do is, evaluate what the job spec looks like and find some of the key points in there that you yourself are very passionate about. And in your interview, bring that up to the interviewer and ask them, if they're going to be your future manager or future leader or collaborator, you can say like, how much of my time is going to be dedicated towards these 2 things? And is this something that is highly prioritized here? And you can also do that in an alternate way where it's something that you don't potentially want to do a lot of, and ask that same question so that you can really get a sense of what kind of priority that particular task or those tasks are to the company. And if it's something that they're like, oh, we expect you to do that for only 10% of your time because we really need you to be focused on X, Y, and Z area, it gives you a very clear area of understanding of what the priorities are going to be and how you can then be expected to fulfill those. And if that's something that excites you and, it gets you really energized, then that's great. And you should definitely pursue that. But if the sort of opposite is happening, where you're like, this is going to be a similar situation to my previous role where I wanted to spend 75% of my time doing these two things instead of like 10%, then at that point you can say, okay, maybe this isn't for me. And I think also knowing that no job is perfect, as much as we are always angling towards like the dream job, my general rule is, so as long as you're able to do the job that you want and the job that excites you and motivates you at least 60% of the time, then the other 40% is going to be absolutely fine and is something that I'm happy to choose to take on. But if it's going to be flipped the opposite direction, then at that point, that's where I try and weigh out like, if this is the place for me, because ultimately you don't really want to start a new opportunity thinking like, oh, I can handle this for 6 months tops, and then I want to be out of here type thing.
No, it's so true. Now, the other thing too is that I found more organizations doing, or at least I encourage the organizations to do this when they are interviewing, is to be really transparent about the realities of the organization. Because the last thing you want to do is apologize for the fact that you don't have great processes and systems in place, or try to make it something that it's not. You know, we're really good at this, and these are our wins, and this is where we've been really successful, and this is where we're struggling.
Yeah.
And so that makes a big difference when companies can really, and you can even ask into that. Like, you know,
Absolutely.
we're all looking for this obviously to be the right fit and the right opportunity. But again, that's an important thing to ask, to say, what are your wins? What are you guys really good at? Where are you struggling? What are the pain points? Because the truth is, everybody, I think there was a balancing problem when it came to the pandemic, and it was all about, there was a lot of me, which is fine. Okay. But it was way too heavily weighted. And so people would lead with what I need, what I want, what you're not going to give me. And it was just like this, it didn't work out well.
Yeah.
And then companies also don't want to, at least I found that they want people that want to come in and add value and do the work. I don't think companies are intentionally trying to not set people up for success, but sometimes companies just are run in different ways, and organizations or teams are different. And so sometimes you just don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
It's just so important to make sure, when we were talking about this conversation, about we can create our own great culture by doing great work. And so there are opportunities for us individually to help shape the workplace to be what you want it to be as well. So we're empowered to do that. We have agency to do that. And you obviously not right out of the gate, but there's a balance.
I think what's really interesting too is realizing that the interview process and also being hired is a very strong dynamic that you're sort of dancing with as you go. And a big part of it, as you mentioned, is like managing expectations. So thinking about your own expectations going into a new role or into your existing job, and wondering whether or not those are being met is a really great place to start that level of self-reflection, to understand maybe why you're feeling frustrated about something or really excited about something else. And so you're able to see where you're at on the scale of, are my expectations about where I'm working being met from a cultural perspective, or are they being met from my sort of like technical career perspective? And being able to reflect on those things is really helpful to start to whittle down what you're actually looking for if you're finding yourself in a place where you're asking yourself a lot of questions. And I think from that point also, what's really interesting is similar to what you were mentioning about how during the pandemic, people were very focused on themselves and wondering what was going to be given to them within this opportunity. I think what we're seeing a lot of now is people really want to contribute towards a culture, but they have to feel that give and take relationship between themselves and the business or the company that they're going to be working with, and the team that they're going to be working with too. I think Simon Sinek was the person that sort of said this on a recent podcast that I was listening to that I thought was really interesting. I don't agree with everything that he mentioned, but one part was really interesting to me where he said a lot of people look towards their businesses as a place for them to find community, as a place for them to find career growth, as a place for them to find friendship, as a place for them to find all of these things. And companies are just looking at this going, hey, we need someone to fill this role. And good companies are looking at it with a little bit more adage to that, with more dimension to that, with more of a wider lens of what someone who's going to step into the role is going to be able to contribute to the role and to the culture. And so I think mitigating your own expectations and taking inventory of, am I fulfilled in other areas of my life as well as my job? And if not, how can my job drive that level of fulfillment, but also not be the only thing that gives me that level of fulfillment? Because it's never going to only be that. Just as much as the fulfillment that you get from your job might not be something that you receive within your friendships or within your close relationships. And so I think there's a very strong balance to be stricken there. And it's not to say that you can't ask for things, like you absolutely should. And there are things that you can definitely look out for. But I think there's also this sort of very strong give and take dynamic that takes a little bit of experience to learn. But ultimately, as you start the initial interview process, just for the sake of this conversation and bringing it into that sphere, you're able to start to look at, okay, so we've looked at the job spec description. We've figured out how much of a percentage I'm going to be contributing in X way and in Y way. Now we're talking about management. Now we're talking about culture. And now I can start to see, okay, are my expectations being met or are they not?
No, that's a great point. And I think too, that preparation and confidence and clarity are the three things that you want to address prior to going into the interview process.
Absolutely.
And the preparation is the homework and also the examples, what we talked about earlier, like examples of the work that you've done in this situation or that situation. Also preparation and looking at the job description, the website and so on. Sometimes you just can learn more about looking at the organization, but the confidence comes from that preparation.
Yeah.
And when you have that confidence, you feel more comfortable asking into some of these areas.
And that comes from just doing a level of digging that you would do for a role that you're really excited about. So if you're finding that doing research on the company isn't exciting you, then it's very likely that working at that company won't really excite you. Obviously, there's a degree of research that you can do, and through the interview process, you might come to find, oh, hey, this is actually really interesting, and I didn't think it was really going to be something interesting. And giving it a chance is ideal, but really taking, again, inventory of your instincts in that situation. If doing the research isn't something that is ideal, then, and you're finding it a slog, then likely during the day, you might find that your job is like not that exciting to you. And then if you're finding that you've brought up a value that's on their career site and the interviewer has like no idea what you're talking about, then it's probable that you won't see that on a day-to-day basis. And if that's important to you, then that's the question you need to ask yourself of, is this actually going to be a place I'm willing to work at or not? Because another thing that's really important is to notice it's not just only up to you to shape the company culture. And it's not only up to every other individual, it's a collective thing. And so being able to have that mindset is incredibly important so that you don't feel like you're going in there saying, I saw empathy was a company value and we didn't really talk about it in the interview process, but I'm going to make sure that everybody is empathetic when I start working there. And that's how you get exhausted, right? So want to watch out for that too.
I know Leah there's another question, but I did want to bring up the red flag issue, which is many times we see the red flags, they might be subtle or whatever, and we ignore them. We choose to ignore them. So one of the things you want to do coming off of interview 1, 2, or 3 is to address that within yourself and to actually bring it to the surface so that you're not ignoring it because you want a certain outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And if that comes up in the conversation of the interview, and when you get to the point where the interviewer asks you if you have any questions, ask the question at that point. It's so important. I think we go in there with questions that we would have initially prepared, and it's equally as important to ask those. But being able to say, you mentioned typically people work really late and on the weekend. I just wanted to go back to that really quickly to find out what the expectations are or something like that, so that you're really getting a clear picture as someone who's interviewing, and you're not hanging up that call going, oh, I should have asked about this, but no, it's going to be fine. And I'll just try it out anyway. And then 3 months later, you're completely burnt out from that experience. So there's that too. Yeah.
Leah, what do you have for us?
Yes. So someone asked how they can show enthusiasm for a role when they are fairly introverted.
Yeah.
Wow.
Great
question.
question. I think being excited about a role doesn't necessarily mean or equate itself to being extroverted. I think it is always a little bit of a struggle for introverted people in a corporate environment to be heard, because oftentimes we go towards the loudest voice in the room. But I think there is more and more people noticing that we need to like level the playing field with people that contribute to a conversation. So when you're in a position where you're interviewing for a role and you're excited about it, but it's not written all over your face, what you can do is ask a lot of poignant questions about the company and show examples about how your experience is something that will lend itself well to adding value to that team. So even teeing up the answers that you have to their questions by saying, I like to add a lot of value by hosting webinars and doing lunch and learns to teach my team some of the things that we do on our team to make sure everybody has that level of transparency, because I see that as a huge value. And I notice that your company holds that as a strong value set on your career site. That demonstrates that you've done your homework, you're prepared, you're excited about the company, you're specific, and you're very clear on what you're adding to the team. Doing that in a way that's answering the question in a very well-rounded way will not only show you as a strong candidate, but it will also be a way for you to express enthusiasm without having to feel like you have to be very loud and extroverted and just overall gestury in the way that you enter the conversation.
Oh, for sure. No. And what's so interesting is that what's happened is culture is by far the number one topic on job seekers' minds. And it's ahead of, they want a healthy culture, and it's above work schedules such as remote or hybrid or 4-day work week. It's above benefits and salary, even salary.
Yeah.
Salary is like number 3 right now.
Yeah.
So it's a big topic. And I do encourage, I know we're at the end of our time together, but I do encourage job seekers to go onto our website for past career conversations and look at the webinar that we had about the STAR method of interviewing. And the reason why it's valuable is it helps you prepare for interviews. Take the time to prepare so that then it's all in the confidence that you have. And that confidence will help you by the right organization and the right role.
Absolutely. I think also like being able to exude that confidence over Zoom or any other video conferencing tool is particularly hard if that's not your sort of default way of being. So preparing with a friend can be really helpful too, where if they dial in quickly for 10 minutes and you're able to just have that icebreaker moment of speaking into your camera because you don't feel like it's exactly second nature to you, can be really helpful and start to really take away some of that part of the either like nervousness factor or just the uncomfortable feeling that some people might have in that sort of situation, because it can be really hard to feel out an opportunity when you're doing it from a distance. And asking some of these questions is sort of monumentally important in that situation so that you're able to show up in the conversation, not only demonstrating that you're prepared, but also having the takeaways that you need to make the right decision. So, if you're going to be working from home a lot and for you personally, you feel like you really need that in-person interaction, well, that's immediately going to tell you what the day-to-day is going to look like. And I think that's why culture is so important on the list of priorities for people who are job seeking, because it has to do with how you're spending your time. And we spend, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's likely 80% of your week at work. And so if you're spending that amount of time not being happy or fulfilled, then it's only natural that you're going to feel like you have to ask yourself some questions about whether or not this role or this company is right for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a great conversation as usual. Every time we talk together, it was always, we could talk for hours. And Leah, we appreciate you leading us in this conversation. So thanks you all to everyone for joining us today. We have so many choices today about different webinars and different podcasts and different things that we can listen to. So we want to bring these programs to you and these wonderful leaders and thought leaders to our audience so that we can all have the lives that we want and the work lives that we want. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone.
I just wanted to say thank you, Erika, for your time today, and Lauren. And thank you all for joining us. I encourage you to check out our website at mulberrytalent.com to view our current job opportunities. And as Lauren mentioned, view past career conversations. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks
so everyone. Much. And Erika, thanks
Bye.
Again. It was great to spend time with you today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And good luck to everyone out there job seeking. I know it can be hard out there. So
yeah. All right.
Best of luck.
Have a good week, everyone.